Dorian's heart raced as he made the final adjustments to the quantum displacement machine. This was it. Years of research culminating in a single moment that could alter reality forever. He took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands against the control panel. Initiating displacement sequence in 3, 2, 1. He pressed the button. A blinding surge of energy enveloped him. Dorian felt his entire being scatter into atoms, spiraling across dimensions. When his vision finally cleared, he found himself standing among towering plants glowing softly with luminescent hues of violet and gold. Their otherworldly illumination cast shifting, surreal shadows. This definitely wasn't his laboratory. Holy shh! Dorian stumbled backward, his foot catching on a thick vine. He fell awkwardly to the ground, letting out an undignified yelp. Groaning, he pushed himself upright, frantically searching for his communicator. The screen was shattered, sparks flickering from broken wires. No, 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 he muttered desperately, tapping the teleportation bracelet around his wrist. Nothing happened. "Come on, you useless piece of—" A sudden rustling from the nearby bushes froze him in place. Bright, piercing eyes emerged from the foliage. Dorian held his breath as several tall humanoid figures with silvery green skin stepped into the clearing. One of them, a striking female with swirling, luminescent patterns shimmering across her body, approached cautiously. She spoke, her voice musical but unintelligible. Slowly, Dorian raised his hands, hoping the gesture communicated peace. "Come in peace," he said carefully, expecting no comprehension. To his amazement, the female's eyes widened in recognition. She tapped a small device on her wrist, and when she spoke again, her words flowed in perfect English. "Incredible," she murmured, studying him intently. "I've never encountered a species quite like yours. What kind of creature are you?" Dorian struggled to find his voice. I'm a human from Earth. My name's Dorian." He offered an awkward wave. "Don't suppose you could tell me where exactly I am or how you can understand me?" The woman's head tilted slightly. "Earth? I'm unfamiliar with that world. You're currently on Varelia Prime." She indicated herself with a graceful gesture. "I am Celine, chief xenobiologist of the Varelian Scientific Council. As for understanding, we possess universal translators. Your language was easily decoded. Varelia Prime." Dorian's knees nearly buckled. "That's impossible. I was just in my lab on Earth. The displacement device must have malfunctioned, sending me off course." Celine's eyes brightened with excitement. "Displacement? You've mastered instantaneous matter relocation?" "Mastered might be generous," Dorian admitted with a grimace. Celine swiftly turned to her companions, speaking rapidly in their melodic native tongue. After a quick nod, they retreated silently into the glowing forest. "Come," she said, extending her hand to him. "You must share everything you know about this displacement technology. In return, I'll help you adapt until we find a way to send you home." Dorian hesitated briefly before accepting her hand. A pleasant warmth traveled up his arm at her touch. "Yeah, sounds good. Thank you." As they walked, Dorian couldn't help but gaze at Celine. The luminous patterns on her skin shifted mesmerizingly with each graceful movement. "So," he said, attempting to break the silence. "You're a xenobiologist? That's fascinating. I'm actually a biologist myself, although my field focuses more on genetics and molecular biology." Celine's eyes sparkled with genuine interest. "Intriguing. Perhaps we could exchange notes. I'd be fascinated to learn about Earth's biology." "Absolutely," Dorian grinned eagerly. "And I'd love to hear about your species. How does your bioluminescence function? Is it chemical? Bioelectric?" "A bit of both, actually," Celine explained enthusiastically. "Our epidermis contains specialized organelles. They continued talking animatedly as they moved deeper into the alien forest. Despite his strange circumstances, Dorian felt surprisingly at ease in Celine's presence. Her passion was contagious. Distracted, Dorian stumbled again, nearly falling. But Celine swiftly caught him, her strong arms steadying him around the waist. "Careful," she whispered gently, her face mere inches from his own. "This forest can be dangerous for those unfamiliar with it." Dorian's breath quickened, noticing delicate specks of silver in her deep emerald eyes. "Right. Thanks." Neither moved for a long moment, before Celine abruptly stepped back, a deeper green hue coloring her cheeks. "We should continue," she said hurriedly. "The research facility isn't far." As they resumed walking, Dorian couldn't stop glancing at Celine. She was unlike anyone he'd ever encountered. Brilliant, exotic, captivating. He found himself oddly hopeful that his stay on Virelia Prime would last a little longer. Soon, they arrived at a vast structure blending crystalline architecture with living greenery. Celine led him through winding corridors to a spacious laboratory. "This will be your workspace during your stay," she explained. "I've instructed my team to provide full access to our resources." Dorian whistled appreciatively. "Incredible. Thank you, Celine. I don't know how I'll repay your generosity." She waved dismissively. "No repayment needed. Studying a new species is reward enough." Her eyes glittered playfully. "Though I will require you to submit to a thorough physical examination." Dorian choked. "Wait, what?" Celine laughed softly, the sound sending pleasant chills down his spine. "Purely for science, of course. Your biology must be fully documented." "Right," Dorian tugged at his collar nervously. "Of course, science." Over the next few days, Dorian immersed himself in his work, repairing the displacement machine while sharing knowledge with Celine. They quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm, exchanging ideas and diving deep into comparative xenobiology. He found himself increasingly captivated, not just by this extraordinary world, but by Celine herself. Her sharp intellect, dry humor, and infectious excitement when making discoveries. He caught himself staring more than once, entranced by the graceful movements and luminous patterns dancing on her skin. Celine seemed equally fascinated by him, peppering him with questions about Earth, hanging on to his every word. When they worked closely, her touch lingered, sending sparks through him. One evening, as they analyzed genetic data, Celine suddenly fixed him with an intense look. "Dorian, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." His heart skipped. "Yes?" "Your hair." She reached out, gently running fingers through his messy dark hair. "How does it maintain its shape without muscular structures or rigid support?" Dorian blinked, stunned by the question, then burst into laughter. "That's just how it grows. We use products to keep it styled." Celine furrowed her brow thoughtfully. "Fascinating. And does it truly continue growing your entire life? How do you manage that?" "We cut it," Dorian chuckled, taking her hand and guiding it through his hair. Celine's eyes widened in wonder as she touched it. "It's incredibly soft," she whispered, leaning closer, emerald eyes locked onto his. Dorian felt his pulse quicken, the air charged between them. Almost. Unconsciously, he began leaning in. Celine jerked back suddenly, nearly falling off her chair. "I just remembered," she exclaimed awkwardly. "There's a very important science matter I must attend to immediately." She quickly hurried out, leaving Dorian confused and slightly hurt. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Maybe things had gotten awkward between them after the previous night, Dorian thought, glancing at Celine as they quietly finished their day's research. He tried to respect the boundaries she'd silently put up, but he couldn't shake off the disappointment lingering in his chest. Perhaps clearing the air was best. "Hey, Celine," he began hesitantly. "About last night. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I didn't mean to overstep any boundaries. Celine's movements paused for a moment, her glowing patterns flickering nervously. It's all right, Dorian. I may have overreacted. An uneasy silence settled between them. Dorian fiddled anxiously with the tools in front of him, desperate to find the right words to ease the tension. Just then, a loud alarm pierced the air, red lights flashing urgently across the laboratory. "Warning!" announced a computerized voice. "Unstable quantum fluctuations detected. Possible breach imminent." Dorian's heart jumped. "What's happening?" Selene quickly examined her data panel, her expression alarmed. "The quantum reactor! It's destabilizing. We have to shut it down." Dorian hurried to the controls, but his heart sank at what he saw. "It's too late. The core is already critical. It's going to blow." Reacting instinctively, he grabbed Selene and pulled her close, shielding her just as the machine erupted in a blinding burst of energy. When the dust settled, Dorian cautiously opened his eyes. He realized he was holding Selene tightly, their bodies pressed together, hearts pounding rapidly. You shielded me," Selene whispered, her eyes wide with astonishment. "Of course," Dorian murmured softly, gazing into her radiant eyes. "I couldn't let you get hurt." For a moment, neither of them moved, hearts racing in sync. Slowly, Selene leaned in, and Dorian's breath caught. Their lips brushed gently, sending a rush of warmth through him. Abruptly, Selene pulled back, alarmed, wiping her mouth anxiously. I didn't realize it involved fluid exchange," she exclaimed, clearly startled. Dorian blinked in confusion. "It's just a kiss. You said you wanted to try—" She looked, genuinely distressed, frantically wiping her lips. "Is this how humans initiate reproduction?" "What? No!" Dorian sputtered. "I mean, it's not only about reproduction. Humans kiss for affection, intimacy, bonding." Selene's glowing patterns shifted rapidly, clearly puzzled. "Virelians don't engage in direct fluid exchange. Our intimacy is expressed through synchronized, bioluminescent patterns." Dorian's eyes widened with realization. "So you mean your species doesn't have physical intimacy?" Selene tilted her head, curious. "Physical reproductive contact? Some theorists have suggested it's possible, but no Virelian has ever tried. It's considered speculative at best." Dorian laughed nervously. "I suppose that makes sense. Humans are, well, different." Selene studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps a compromise could be found?" "Maybe," Dorian replied with a playful smile. "Though I don't think I can manage bioluminescence myself." Selene's lips curled into a gentle, amused smile. "I am willing to attempt this kissing again, if you wish." Dorian's heart soared. "I'd really like that." Slowly, cautiously, they leaned in once more, their lips meeting softly, tenderly. Warmth surged between them, a new and wonderful sensation spreading through Dorian's chest. As they parted, Selene's luminous patterns swirled brightly, creating an enchanting dance of colors. For a moment, they both stared, breathless. "I think I'm beginning to understand your species' appeal," Selene murmured softly, smiling shyly. Dorian chuckled, feeling relief and joy flood through him. "Glad to hear it." Selene reached out and gently took his hand. "Perhaps we should continue this exploration, for research purposes, of course." Dorian squeezed her hand warmly, laughing softly. "Of course. Strictly scientific." Together they walked hand in hand out of the lab, the awkwardness finally replaced by mutual curiosity, and something deeper beginning to blossom between them. Maybe he'd misread the signals, cultural differences and all that. The next day, things were decidedly awkward between them. Selene seemed determined to keep their relationship strictly professional, maintaining careful distance during their interactions. Dorian tried to respect her boundaries, but he couldn't deny the pang of disappointment he felt. As their day drew to a close, Dorian finally mustered the courage to clear the air. "Hey, Celine," he began hesitantly. "About last night, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm sorry if I crossed any lines." Celine's shoulders tensed. "It's fine," she replied stiffly, avoiding his gaze. "I merely realized our relationship was becoming unprofessional. Perhaps some distance would be best." Dorian's heart sank. "Right. Of course. I understand." A heavy silence stretched between them. He nervously fiddled with his instruments, desperately searching for something, anything, to ease the tension. Suddenly, alarms blared through the facility, accompanied by flashing red lights. A computerized voice urgently declared, "Warning! Unstable quantum fluctuations detected. Possible dimensional breach imminent." Celine's eyes widened in fear. "The displacement machine!" Together they rushed toward the equipment, which was now sparking wildly and emitting an ominous hum. Dorian's hands flew across the controls, desperately attempting to stabilize it. "It's overloading!" he shouted over the chaos. "The core is going critical!" "Can you shut it down?" Celine asked urgently. Dorian shook his head grimly. "No time. It's going to explode." Without hesitation, he pulled Celine into his arms, shielding her with his body, as a massive burst of energy erupted from the device. For a moment, everything went white. Slowly, awareness returned. Dorian found himself sprawled on the floor, Celine lying atop him, their faces mere inches apart. "Are you all right?" he asked breathlessly. Celine nodded, looking dazed. "You protected me?" she whispered in awe. "Of course," Dorian said gently. "I couldn't let you get hurt." Their eyes met, hearts racing. Slowly, Celine leaned closer and Dorian realized what was about to happen. Just as their lips were about to meet, Celine sneezed directly into his face. Dorian yelped, jerking backward and nearly hitting his head on the floor. Celine quickly scrambled off him, horrified. "I am so sorry," she exclaimed, embarrassment clear on her glowing face. "I don't know what happened. Are you all right?" Wiping his face, Dorian burst out laughing. "I'm fine, though I have to admit that's not exactly how I imagined our first kiss." Celine's cheeks flushed an even deeper emerald. "Kiss? Is that what you were trying to do last night?" Dorian's laughter faded. Yeah, sorry. I thought maybe—" "No, no," Celine quickly interrupted. "I was interested. It's just, on Virelia Prime, affection is expressed through synchronized bioluminescent displays." Dorian blinked. "That actually sounds pretty beautiful, though I'm not sure how I'd manage it without being bioluminescent." Celine smiled shyly. "Perhaps we could find a compromise. I'm willing to explore this human kissing custom if you're willing." Dorian's heart soared. "I'd really like that." This time, as they leaned in, nothing interrupted them. Their lips met softly, sending a warm tingle through Dorian's entire body. As they parted, breathless, Celine's bioluminescent patterns swirled vibrantly, creating a dazzling display. But suddenly Celine froze, eyes wide with shock. She stumbled backward, hitting a lab table. "Celine?" Dorian asked worriedly. "What's wrong?" What was that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Confused, Dorian replied gently, "That was a kiss. You said you wanted to try—" "I didn't know it involved fluid exchange," she exclaimed, frantically wiping her mouth. "Is this how humans initiate reproduction?" "No." Dorian sputtered, blushing fiercely. "I mean, it can lead to that, sure, but kissing itself is mostly about expressing affection, desire, or love." Celine's luminescent patterns flickered uncertainly. Love? Desire? Virelians reproduce through carefully controlled genetic merging. "Direct physical contact isn't necessary," Dorian blinked. "Wait, you mean your people don't have sex?" Celine tilted her head curiously. You mean recreational genetic material exchange? It's purely theoretical. Fringe researchers have speculated about it, but it's never actually occurred. Oh boy, Dorian muttered, running a hand through his hair. We might need to sit down and talk about this. They took seats, Celine cautiously keeping some distance. Dorian took a deep breath, preparing himself. Look, humans engage in physical intimacy for multiple reasons, not just reproduction. It's a way of bonding, expressing affection, love, and desire. Celine's glowing patterns dimmed thoughtfully. It sounds so messy. How do you ensure genetic compatibility? We don't, Dorian admitted with a laugh. That's part of what makes it exciting. It's about emotional connections, too, not just biology? Fascinating, Celine murmured, intrigued. So, kissing precedes the reproductive act? Dorian coughed, face heating further. Sometimes. But kissing can also stand alone. It's about affection, love, and expressing attraction. It releases chemicals in our brains that strengthen bonds. Celine nodded, eyes brightening. Neurochemical? Reactions. That I understand. What other physical symptoms accompany human attraction? Dorian cleared his throat nervously. Well, increased heart rate, flushed skin, pupil dilation. Celine eagerly took notes. Intriguing. And what about organ engorgement? I've read theories. Dorian nearly choked. Maybe we should save that discussion for later. Celine looked disappointed. But this data is critical. Perhaps a practical demonstration purely for scientific. Celine, Dorian interrupted gently. I really like you, but I don't want to be just an experiment. Human relationships are messy, complicated, emotional. Her glowing patterns shifted thoughtfully. Do you think we have the potential for such a relationship? Heart racing, Dorian nodded. Yes, if you're willing to try. Celine hesitated briefly, then reached out and took his hand, sending a gentle warmth up his arm. I find myself strangely drawn to you, Dorian. Perhaps exploring these human customs would be a valuable experience. He squeezed her hand, smiling softly. I'd really like that. Over the next few weeks, Dorian and Celine navigated the complexities of interspecies romance, full of awkward misunderstandings and plenty of laughter. Celine approached their courtship with scientific enthusiasm, documenting each new experience thoroughly. One evening, strolling through the gardens hand in hand, Celine asked curiously, So hand-holding serves no practical purpose? Not really. Dorian chuckled. It just feels nice. Celine smiled, tightening her grip slightly. I can see the appeal. Careful, Dorian teased. Next thing you know, you'll be composing poetry about holding hands. Celine's eyes twinkled mischievously. Varelian poetry involves synchronized bioluminescent patterns, not your archaic verbal structures. Care to give me a demonstration? Dorian teased. I'm not sure your primitive senses could handle my artistic expression, she replied playfully, patterns flickering. Try me. Celine smiled softly, her skin glowing brighter. Dorian found himself mesmerized by her luminous display. It's beautiful, he whispered, awestruck. She leaned closer, whispering softly, It's a poem about discovery and the beauty of the unknown. Does it affect you? Dorian smiled warmly. More than you know. She leaned closer, whispering gently, Perhaps our customs aren't so incompatible after all? As the glowing gardens of Varelia Prime shimmered around them, Dorian realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, learning from each other, one step at a time. Somewhere more private? Dorian asked, his eyes gleaming playfully. Celine's patterns shimmered mischievously. Are you suggesting another experiment in interspecies relations, Dr. Henderson? You know me, Dorian replied, pulling her close. Always in pursuit of scientific knowledge. Their lips met again, warmth spreading through Dorian as Selena's soft mouth pressed against his, her bioluminescence tingling pleasantly against his skin. When they parted, both were breathless. "You know," Selene murmured softly, I'm truly beginning to appreciate these human customs." Dorian chuckled softly. "Just wait until we get to dancing." However, their tender moment was abruptly interrupted by an alert blaring through the lab. A computerized voice urgently announced, "Incoming transmission detected from dimensional anomaly." Selene's eyes widened in surprise. They rushed over to the displacement device, which flashed to life, revealing a holographic projection of a familiar face, Dr. Patel, Dorian's colleague from Earth. "Dorian! Thank goodness!" Dr. Patel exclaimed, visibly relieved. "We've been searching for you for weeks. Are you all right? Where are you?" Dorian's mind raced, struggling to process the sudden appearance. I'm fine. I'm on a planet called Virelia Prime. How did you find me?" "We've been scanning continuously since your disappearance," Dr. Patel said urgently. "Just keep the signal stable. We'll bring you back to Earth within 48 hours. The weight of her words sank heavily into Dorian's chest. "Home," he echoed softly, the words suddenly tasting unfamiliar. The transmission ended abruptly, plunging the lab into silence. Selene regarded him carefully, her bioluminescent patterns dimmed and unreadable. "You'll be leaving then," she finally said, her voice painfully neutral. "I don't know." Dorian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My entire life is back, on Earth. But the thought of leaving you—" He trailed off, uncertain. Selene's expression hardened, patterns dimming. "I understand," she said coolly. "Excuse me." She swept from the room, leaving Dorian alone, dread building within him. News of Dorian's potential departure quickly spread throughout the Virelian scientific community. Opinions were sharply divided. While some scientists were thrilled by the possibility of new interspecies cooperation, others remained deeply suspicious, whispering anxiously about upsetting the natural balance. The tension culminated in a formal hearing before the Virelian High Council. As Dorian presented his proposal for ongoing cooperation between Earth and Virelia Prime, he felt the skeptical eyes of the council scrutinizing him, until a familiar voice spoke out boldly. "If I may?" Selene stepped forward confidently, bioluminescent, patterns glowing vibrantly. "I believe establishing a permanent link between our worlds could be transformative." Dorian's breath caught at her presence. The head counselor leaned forward. "Dr. Selene, your perspective?" Selene approached, gracefully, taking Dorian's hand. "Through our collaboration, Dorian and I have demonstrated that despite cultural differences, our species share deep commonalities. We have even discovered a personal bond, a relationship based on mutual respect, admiration, and affection." Dorian's heart swelled with warmth. "It's true," he declared, squeezing her hand. "I love Selene. Our bond proves humans and Virelians can thrive together." The chamber erupted into excited murmurs. The head counselor raised her hand, restoring silence. "Your proposal is unprecedented," she admitted thoughtfully, "but perhaps it is time we embrace such changes." After tense deliberation, the council agreed to establish the link under careful supervision. Celebrations erupted across Virelia Prime, coinciding with the annual Festival of Harmony. Amidst joyful celebrations, Selene turned to Dorian, patterns glowing radiantly. "We did it," she whispered. "Together," Dorian replied, leaning in for a tender kiss. Soon after, Dr. Patel and a delegation from Earth arrived, astonished to witness the thriving partnership between the two species. Amid the excitement, Selene tugged playfully at Dorian's arm. "Now, Dr. Henderson," she teased. "Earlier you mentioned something called a honeymoon. Shall we begin that experiment? Dorian laughed, pulling her close. Oh, absolutely. For scientific purposes, of course. Always, Celine said mischievously, eyes sparkling. Dorian stood quietly in the nursery of their shared home, gently cradling a tiny bundle. The baby girl's skin was a delicate shade of pale lavender, faintly shimmering with bioluminescent patterns inherited from her mother. Celine approached softly, slipping an arm around his waist. She's perfect, she murmured. As if sensing them, the baby opened her brilliant violet eyes, reaching out tiny fingers to gently touch Dorian's face. Welcome to the universe, little one, Dorian whispered, heart full. You've got quite a legacy ahead. Celine's glowing patterns pulsed softly with love. Together we'll guide her, one small step at a time. Outside, the twin moons of Viralia Prime bathed their home in gentle light, illuminating the promise of a future built on love, understanding, and endless curiosity, and all because of a kiss and a quantum leap of faith.